He has authored a number of books on faith and life. The National Trust poll in 2014 elected him one of Australia's 100 national living treasures. Tim practices as a solicitor in family and criminal law, both in established firms and in his own practice. In 1981, he travelled to Switzerland with his wife Meredy, where they both studied theology at the International Baptist Seminary in Ruschlikon near Zurich, before graduating with a Bachelor of Divinity and returning to Australia to become the minister of St Kilda Baptist Church. He also received a Master of Theology from Whitley College at the Melbourne College of Divinity. Tim was elected Mayor of St Kilda in 1993 and became well known for championing the cause of local democracy and for his clashes with a certain Jeff Kennett. Tim was appointed CEO of World Vision Australia on the 24th of November 2003, having spent much of his career focusing on local and domestic issues. He said he relished the opportunity to focus on international issues. In his first full year in the role, Costello became the face of Australia's response to the Boxing Day tsunami. He led fundraising efforts, and World Vision Australia raised over $118 million for relief and rehabilitation programs. During his tenure, the organisation grew from funding 480 projects benefiting 10.4 million people to more than 800 World Vision development projects benefiting close to 100 million people across the globe, including Australia. He received the Victorian of the Year award in July 2004 in recognition of his public and community service. He was made an Officer of the Order of Australia in June 2005 and was a Victorian nominee for the Australian of the Year in 2006. He is the 2008 winner of the Australian Peace Prize awarded for the Peace Organisation of Australia, and he's listed, as I said, as a national living treasure. Welcome, Tim. Would you please come and join us?
Thank you for that introduction. I must get you to speak at my funeral. Very comprehensive. Delight to be here, and great to see so many men, and men sort of my age. I often start when I'm speaking in schools saying, to the kids who are looking at you, I'm so old I didn't study ancient history. I lived through ancient history, because to kids you look like a dinosaur. I actually feel very comfortable in this audience. Thank you for making me feel very comfortable. So it's a delight to be hearing of the extraordinary range of interests and opportunities. Great to see a choir starting. One little fact. Studies in two regions in Italy wanted to explain why one region was prospering and the other was failing, because they both had similar demographics and similar educational standards. Everything was similar about the two regions. One was failing, one was prospering. And this study discovered that the region that was prospering had, unlike the other region, right across it, these networks of choirs, choral societies. And they discovered that people who came together and sang together afterwards, eating pizza and beer, would talk about their kids, talk about the community, talk about their businesses, talk about the opportunities out of trust from singing together, created this entrepreneurial engine that actually had a whole region prospering compared to its neighbour. I thought, isn't that a fascinating insight? The importance of coming together, doing things together, and out of that saying, what can we solve together? How can, out of trust, we do something? So I'm sure Probus has been a bit of that experience for you. Well, one of the areas of our society that purports to create community, though it is devastatingly the opposite is the gambling area. It purports to create community because by and large state governments have got, when they're doing green site developments in a new estate, they have got community on the cheap. They've simply handed out licences to a pokies club and said, you are now the community in the area. They haven't created other community groups because they're wanting to save money. And of course the gambling industry always is in the front door saying, in this new estate, give a licence to the club and it'll be a $10 Palmer and we'll have a few community activities. Sounds a good deal for state governments, right? Except for the shadow underbelly. Here's the shadow underbelly. 62% of all the revenue going through pokies comes from people who are addicted. 62% of all the revenue. You see, the pokies are built by the most brilliant psychologists developing the most attractive signs and games and sounds, and now we now have all the MRI brain scans to prove this, that when you are sitting in front of the machine, it is so attractive, so addictive, you lose all track of time. You lose all track of how much money you've lost. And 62% of all the revenue is coming from people who are addicted. What that addiction actually spells out is 25% of all the domestic violence in our state comes from pokies addiction. What it spells out is people who get addicted either go bankrupt or to jail, literally. I got involved, I wasn't against gambling. In fact, my grandfather was an SP bookie, so how can I be against gambling? I remember as a kid him being on watch out and having a cockatoo down the street to report if a policeman was coming. I was never against gambling. I was running a legal office in the Baptist church in St Kilda, and a woman walked in. Pokies had just been introduced to Victoria in 1992, and I didn't have an objection to it. I didn't even raise my voice about it. It was always going to come, I figured. New South Wales had them since 1955. Well, this woman who sat in front of me asking me to represent her. She had had a fantastic job, happily married, 3 kids, didn't smoke or drink, middle-aged. And pokies had come. She had just started playing like lots of Victorians did. You didn't have to go in the bus over the border. And she found herself addicted. She ended up losing everything. She ended up stealing 60 grand from her employer. Her marriage survived, but I visited the family quite a bit. I represented her in court. She got 4 years jail. I remember visiting her in Tarrangale prison and asking myself this question: how does a middle-aged woman who has never been in trouble with the law, happily married, no other addictions, didn't smoke or drink, how does she end up in prison for 4 years? How does this happen? As I started to reflect on that question, I wrote a book with an age journalist, Royce Miller, published in 2000, called Wanna Bet? Winners and Losers in Australia's Gambling Industry. And I discovered things that absolutely shocked me and got me motivated, why I'm still motivated around this issue. It shocked me to discover that Australia has 75% of all the world's pokies that are in pubs and clubs. 75% of all the world's pokies that are in pubs or clubs. It's scarcely believable, is it? Most pokies, and this is far healthier, are in casinos around the world. And the thing about a casino is it's destination gambling. You plan to go to a destination knowing you're going to gamble a bit or do whatever else, have a meal, and you've got to have enough money to get home. It's intentionally thought out. Because pokies in Australia are on every second corner, You weren't intending to gamble, you were intending to shop. And because they're open 24 hours, you go, oh, got 30 minutes on the car parking, I'll just slip in, never know, I might have a win. And because the pokies are built for addiction, the MRI brain scans show the dopamine release, when you're sitting in front of that machine, hits the pleasure centre of the brain with the force of cocaine. And they're rigged. As soon as you press a button on that pokies, in that nanosecond you've won or lost. But you know what happens? Up comes one pyramid, 2 pyramids, 3 pyramids over 4 or 5 seconds. You only need the 5th pyramid and it's jackpot, and it's always just above the line or just below the line. You are so close. The dopamine has been released. It's hitting the pleasure centre. It's called a near miss. It's actually total BS. There was no near miss. As soon as you pressed that button, you had won or lost. It's designed to release the dopamine and a near miss. Other addictive, deceptive features. You can be playing 5, 6 lines of pokies if you've ever played them. You're down overall, but if you have a win, and this is what happens on one line, you're still down overall. Off goes the music, the jackpot sounds, the dopamine released. I have won. No, you haven't. You've still lost. You're way behind. It's to release the dopamine. It's designed for addiction. It's less than 20% of Victorians that ever play the pokies. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? The ones who play are addicted. They happen to be located in the poorest areas or the greenfield sites where they provide the community. And state governments irresponsibly get it on the cheap. Well, it's always been an unlevel playing field. At the moment, I've got a little thing running in New South Wales called the March 25 election. And I've worked very closely with Dom Perrottet, the Premier. And he has been the first Premier, certainly leader of either side of politics. Here in Victoria, both are captured by the pokies industry, hopelessly captured. Dan Andrews and Matthew Guy, hopelessly captured. By the way, the biggest donation ever in Labor Party history was hotels giving $761,000 to Dan Andrews in 2017. We didn't have transparency and donation laws. And Dan Andrews received that amount. Matthew Guy, who was opposition leader, received about $500,000. And though pokies licences weren't coming up till, this is 2017 I'm talking about, they weren't coming up for renewal to 2022. In 2017, bipartisan agreement, they renewed pokies licences to 2045. After the biggest donations to both sides. The shadow cabinet really is the pokies industry. Premier Perrottet did something extraordinary. Clubs New South Wales, just to give you a size of this, Clubs New South Wales and the hotels with pokies in New South Wales are a $95 billion a year turnover. $95 billion a year turnover. That buys a lot of politicians, it buys a lot of media. So always for the past 6, 7 elections, Clubs New South Wales, 6 months out before an election, sign an MOU with both Labor and Liberal, all premiers and opposition leaders have signed it, that whoever wins, they will not raise taxes on pokies, they will not change regulation on pokies. What vested interest gets to sign MOUs with both sides of politics? Premier Perrottet was so brave, he refused to sign the MOU. Back last year, starting at Easter, he started saying it's billions into New South Wales Treasury, and I was Treasurer, but this is terrible. This is built on the backs of social misery. Premier Perrottet then commissioned the New South Wales Crime Commission to do a 12-month study into money laundering in suburban pokies. The results came out in October last year. The New South Wales Crime Commission found billions of dollars of dirty money being laundered at suburban and regional pokies. So your big crims, the triads who are at Crown Casino, and we've had Royal Commissions lifting the lid, they launder their money in the high roll of floors at Crown, hundreds of millions. By the way, I've spoken to the new CEO of Crown, now owned by Blackstone. I saw him before Christmas. He's worked in the gaming industry in Macau for 20 years. He said to me, I couldn't believe what was allowed here in Australia. Macau, the surveillance and the expulsion of anyone linked to the triads, they were being flown in, they were getting special fast-track visas to gamble at Crown. This is the current CEO telling me he could not believe what they were getting away with here. Well, the Royal Commission, as you saw, lifted the lid on it. Well, when we think about what Dom Perrottet started to say, and then the Crime Commission revealed billions of dollars of dirty money. It's your big crims at the Crown and other casinos, your suburban drug traffickers and those who burgled your house and have hot goods and need to clean them up so that the police ask about unexplained wealth. They're laundering the money at pokies. Dan Andrews refuses to have a Crime Commission report like New South Wales has had. So out of that, Premier Perrottet very bravely, and it might be political death for him, announced what is our policy, a cashless card. Ours being the Alliance for Gambling Reform. I'd encourage you to go to our website and add your voice on petitions, etc. The cashless card kills two birds with the one stone. It gets all cash out of the pokies. To play at the pokies, you've got to have, let's call it like a Mikey card. And it's, to get that, to play the pokies, you have to reveal your identity and show it's linked to a debit account. No cash. It gets the crims out because the crims will never reveal their identity. They want cash. They load up $10,000 cash in one go. One go on New South Wales pokies. They hate the idea of a card. The second thing that the cashless card does, that Perrottet has announced and will legislate if he wins office again, is anyone who has the card to play the pokies, before they play will have to set their own limits of loss. It's up to them what they set. Why this is so important is we know in that moment, before you play, is the moment of sanity. The mortgage this month, the food bills, the school costs, I can really only afford to lose this, and you set a loss limit. And once you're over that loss limit, you're locked out for a week, because all the pokies will be linked, they'll all talk to each other with this card. You can't just go down to another venue having exceeded your loss limit, you're locked out for a week. Now, the pokies industry in New South Wales, Clubs New South Wales and the AHA hate this. They're backing Chris Minns, the Labor leader, because the Labor leader refuses to do the cashless card. Though the New South Wales Crime Commission, the New South Wales Police Commissioner, all health professionals, John Howard, John Anderson, who backed it, and Gerard Hayes, Secretary of the New South Wales Unions. When he came out backing the card, Chris Minns, the opposition leader, really was spooked. He came out saying this is just hurting the poor. They're mainly pokies in Labor electorates. Why aren't we making this bipartisan? By the way, the cashless card is now bipartisan in Tasmania. The Liberal Premier, Jeremy Rockcliffe, took the initiative. Labor equivocated for 2 or 3 days, but then they said, yep, we agree. That means the pokies industry can't pick off one party against another, which is what they always do. All pokies in casinos after the Royal Commissions will have to have the cashless card because of the crime revealed, because of the worst predatory gambling practice of preying on those who play at the pokies. So, in New South Wales, there are a number of independents running, and they're running on this cashless card, saying this 95 billion a year turnover industry has run New South Wales state politics too long. If Perrottet wins, or if it's a minority government, because the Greens, the Independents, are all backing the cashless card. So are the Teals, actually, who are running against Liberals up there. They're backing the cashless card. They're sort of scratching their head because they really wanted to run against Perrottet on transparency and integrity of government. And we all know the cashless card goes fundamentally to integrity, to getting the pokies' money and donations out of the parties and their control out. So 25th of March, though we're Victorians, watch that election. For the first time, there's an election on a massive social policy change for a $95 billion a year turnover. Well, what about Victoria? Well, what about Victoria? You know, we went to Matthew Guy before the last state election. We said, you need a policy. Do you agree? Matthew needed a policy. We said, this is the policy. Look what Perrottet's saying and what he'll do. Guy wouldn't touch it. Oh no, you don't take the industry, they're so big. Dan Andrews hasn't been prepared to touch it. If New South Wales falls and the cashless card comes in, it will flow here. Because no Premier is going to want the Crims going across the border loading up cash anymore. No Premier will actually abide that. So that's why that is quite a pivotal moment, and we'll see. Minns at the moment is still ahead, but more independents in Fairfield, Cabramatta, if you know, that's the belly of the beast for pokies. An independent and a mayor, Frank Carboni's just announced today he'll be running, and it should be a Labor seat. That will be worrying Minns. There's a lot to play out yet in what might happen in New South Wales. Well, let me finish and then open it up for questions, saying I've never been a prohibitionist. I've never said people shouldn't gamble. Of course, adults have the right to gamble. But when I met Michelle Rowland yesterday, the Federal Minister for Communications, funnily enough, she wanted to meet me very quickly after last week I called for her resignation. I called for her resignation because it came out, you might have seen it in the press, she had taken donations from Sportsbet for her campaign. How does a shadow communications minister, who once is the minister as she is now, and sets the policy that makes Sportsbet hundreds of millions of dollars, take donations? Can you explain that to me? Well, I had said Michelle Rowlands is Duchess by Tabcorp and Sportsbet donations. She wouldn't meet me, and the Alliance for Gambling Reform last year requested. Suddenly we had a meeting. It happened to coincide with the fact that she was going to be on Q&A last night. And she knew she was going to be asked. And she said all the right things yesterday at the meeting. In Q&A, I was out playing tennis last night, so I didn't see it, but I read reports. She said it was a mistake. I shouldn't take the donations. I'll never take them again. But this is just how insidious it is. When it comes to online and sports betting, we have on free-to-air TV here in Victoria 948 sports bet ads a day. 948 a day. What these foreign, and they're mostly foreign, online betting companies who set up in Northern Territory. Northern Territory government isn't even up to a bad council in Victoria. They are allowed to all register, they all got licences. Where do the tsunami of ads all come out of? Because they all registered in the Northern Territory. That's where they're coming out of. And those foreign registered massive companies, they're Canadian and Irish sports betting companies, who have these tsunami of ads, literally have gone upstream. They now effectively own the AFL. They now effectively own the NRL. They now effectively own soccer. When I talk to the powers at SBS, which has sports bet ads, they want to get rid of them, but they say if we get rid of them, we will lose the soccer, which is the signature SBS televised event. They literally own the AFL. When you read of the AFL's $4 billion deal with Channel 7 for the broadcast rights, how they're going to recoup Channel 7 that $4 billion is even more sports bet ads. What is terrifying here is that 10-year-old kids, 80% of them know the logos, the jingles, the odds of what is an adult product. Imagine if 10-year-old kids knew the difference between Peter Stuyvesant or Marlboro cigarettes, an adult product. You cannot advertise alcohol before 8:30 at night, but you have sports bet ads on 6 o'clock commercial news, Block, MasterChef, literally grabbing our kids' minds. There's not a child today that's watched AFL without thinking somehow it's brought to them by gambling companies. The AFL have profoundly sold out. The AFL were quite good, saying, yes, Tim, we agree with you, get the AFL clubs out of pokies. And we did, by and large. Unfortunately, my club, Essendon, hasn't, and Richmond hasn't, but when Eddie Maguire got out, he was still president, he rang me, he said, you've been a pain in the arse, Tim, but we've got rid of our pokies, cost us some money. Tim, it's the right thing to do. Tim, it feels like a spiritual experience. Eddie, spiritual experiences, you be the judge. But he did the right thing. Geelong and the Bulldogs and Melbourne, we got the AFL. Gil McLaughlin was saying, "Oh yeah, that's good. Yes, they do damage." Yeah, but as soon as it was the AFL's bottom line, and they get 3 different cuts. I'll explain that later if you want, of sports betting ads. Absolutely no movement, only doubling down. So we have in Australia 40% higher losses on poker machines than anywhere in the world. We have in Australia 20% higher losses on online sports betting gambling than anywhere in the world. We have in Australia the greatest gambling losses per capita of anywhere in the world, and they're 40% higher than the nation that comes second. If guns are America's blind spot, the rest of the world looks at Australia and says gambling and its capture is Australia's blind spot. And that analogy I might just develop. I sort of say tongue-in-cheek, I agree with the Second Amendment in America. I believe every American has a right to bear a ball and musket rifle. That's what it was when it was the Second Amendment. What changed was the technology, and the Second Amendment's used to defend semi-automatic rifles. When pokies were coin operated, remember you put your 2 shillings in, you didn't do much damage. But in the 90s, they went digital. They went from the ball and musket rifle to the semi-automatic, loading up $10,000 in one go, massive speeds, numbers of lines you could play. And still the old, oh well, people are free to gamble and no one has to, and do it responsibly. Let me tell you, where the gamble responsibly message came from. 2012, Josh Landis, just sacked as the head of New South Wales clubs for attacking Perrottet's religion. And Anthony Ball, the previous CEO of New South Wales clubs. Josh Landis and Anthony Ball went to an NRA conference in America. There they were taught at that conference, guns don't kill, people kill. Never blame the gun, blame the individual. They came back and with their spin meisters developed the gamble responsibly message. Sold it to state governments. It came literally via the NRA and New South Wales clubs. What's wrong with that message? It blames the individual. Oh, where most of us are responsible, there's a few pathetic people who are irresponsible. Blame, blame, blame. No, the machine is built for addiction. And the blaming of the individual silences people. Terrible stigma, I'm the irresponsible one. And today in Victoria, it's easier to get help for a drug problem, a mental health problem, and a gambling problem because you're irresponsible. The blame, the scapegoating, the silencing, NRA to New South Wales clubs. Well, the tide might be turning. It's sad for me that Victoria really has to depend on a brave Liberal Premier in New South Wales to stand up and do the right thing. But that's where we're at. If you're a member of the Liberal Party, write to John Basuto and tell him to stand up. Look what his counterpart, Liberal Premier in Tasmania has done. He introduced the cashless card. Look what Perrottet's doing. Get on to John Basuto, get on to your local members, tell them this is outrageous. And why haven't we had a crime commission like New South Wales had here in Victoria? So, here endeth the lesson. I'm open to take some questions. Thank you for having me.
I think we'll have questions. Yes, Chris.
Chris Rennick. Tim, why is it, do you think, that in Western Australia, under two premiers, Richard Court and Jeff Gallop, both sides, would not have pokies? Would not.
Absolutely, and here's... Sorry, go on.
And I don't know whether it's the case now with respect to sports betting, but they showed a certain determination
Totally. So there was a big push to get pokies in Western Australia when Richard Court was Premier. And I addressed his cabinet, and as we walked out, he put his arm around me. He said, "Don't worry, Tim, we're not going to have pokies." And I said, "Oh, that's really good. My arguments convince you." He said, "Oh yeah, they were good," but he said, "Actually, all my life I've been a sailor. I love sailing. We'd go and compete in Sydney where the yacht clubs had massive facilities and multiple restaurants and bistros, all with the pokies. But I noticed him, they had lousy boats." He said, "The money doesn't get there, it goes into other spots." Well, we know. The pokies clubs in New South Wales, not-for-profits, are paying their CEOs 1.5 million a year, not-for-profits. So Richard had his own idiosyncratic reasons. Other premiers there who I've addressed on the legal side go, "We see the damage, we read the statistics. Western Australia has less than a fifth of the problem gambling of the eastern states. We always are being pushed to have it, we're just not going to have it." Now, sports betting is different because it comes out of the Northern Territory, so they have the same saturation with online gambling, but they're holding firm on pokies. And here's a remarkable fact, because the pokies industry will always say, "We bring you community and recreation and sport and some small handouts to this soccer club." And Western Australia, without pokies, except at Burswood Casino, and by my lights, that's fine, that's destination gambling, but they're not through regional towns and suburbs. Western Australia has greater levels of community, sport, recreation and participation than the eastern states. This notion that the pokies bring it to you, and even as a business model, it makes you really lazy. So Canterbury, Bankstown, their NRL club, with the Canterbury Bankstown mini casino, 700 pokies, which they depend on, are in massive deficit, the football club. Broncos and the Storm have no leagues clubs, no pokies. They're in very significant profit. This idea of, well, you need the pokies, which is, you know, what some AFL clubs here were saying, oh, but if we lost that 5 million, we can't buy Buddy Franklin and bring him to Essendon. That would be always the argument. It makes you lazy. It makes you dependent. And it doesn't work. So Western Australia got it right, and they're holding out.
Yes.
Tim, Alan Trumbull. I'm always intrigued because I always understood that the pokey machines take a percentage. They are programmed to take a percentage.
Yeah, they are.
What is that percentage, do you know? And secondly, if you're going to load up 10,000 of dodgy money for money laundering, you are therefore automatically prepared to lose that much to do that job.
Yes, so with money laundering, they would often lose, if you load up 10,000, lose 1,000, and then go and get their cheque from the bar, and they can say to the police, no, I've been playing at the pokies, you know. What the Crime Commission found was that there was both money laundering, so you could get away with your ill-gotten gains, but equally a lot of crims were just playing the pokies. And they said it's dirty money anyway, it's the same crime, it carries 10 years, even if they lost the lot. Exactly. So if I go back historically, you might remember there was a duopoly when the pokies were introduced. Tabcorp and Tattersalls owned all the pokies. So for every dollar that went through a machine, 87 cents overall gets returned to the player. Of that 13 cents lost, a third went to either Tabcorp or Tattersalls, whoever had the licence. A third of that 13 cents went to the club or the hotel. A third of it went to the state government. And now that there isn't a duopoly, basically it's the venue and the state government. But what's happening is the Endeavour Group, Matheson, has bought up the really aggressive pokies pubs. And this is what's interesting, when I say it's not a level playing field, you know, in New South Wales, the AHA said, oh, the cashless card's going to ruin us and you won't have your local pub. 40% of pubs in New South Wales don't even have any pokies, and they're surviving. 20% of clubs in New South Wales don't have any pokies. The people running this are the mini casinos and the aggressive Matheson type Endeavour Group with the most aggressive machines and thrashing them. They're the ones now getting 50% of that 13 cents loss on every dollar, if that makes sense, and state governments get the rest.
Tim, Roger Wilson. Most of your talk today has been about pokies, but how big is the racing industry, that means the dogs, the trots and the horse racing, compared to the pokies? And have you got any further comments about?
Sure.
I mean, we got sick and tired of that Tom, whatever his name was.
Yeah, Tommy.
They were bought out by Ladbrokes.
Yeah.
And there's so many racing people. You mentioned Sportsbet, but there's Bet65, there's Neds, there's all these people come out of nowhere. So how much are they taking out of the market?
So of the $24 billion lost on gambling each year, 16 billion is pokies. Then online sports betting gambles now about 3 billion. Then, and I haven't quite got the figures in my head, racing, greyhounds, horses is, I don't know, 2 or 3 billion. So, my problem is this. We always sort of accepted, maybe we shouldn't, but we always accepted there wouldn't be one greyhound race or horse race without gambling. You wouldn't race otherwise. And we accepted that, okay, betting exists, does damage, absolutely, but it's always been there. What we've now done is turned our cricketers with Bet365 and our footballers with Sportsbet into greyhounds and horses. That's what we've done. Kids are particularly susceptible because it's their football and cricket heroes. Greyhounds and races, and this is, you know, I talked to Mike Baird about this. He was Premier when he tried to reform greyhound racing for animal cruelty reasons. Mike Baird was blindsided because he didn't realise the people opposing him were the gambling interests. They weren't people who were saying, oh no, it's fine to have animal cruelty. Alan Jones and all his like, who rose up and demanded Mike Baird's resignation and reversal on greyhound racing, all had horse races, and they said, let's fight the battle on the poor man's sport greyhounds, because we'll be next. So that brought, it was gambling interest that brought Mike Baird down in New South Wales. Now he knows that. Which is why Don Perrottet's been quite wise. He started talking last Easter about the damage. He waited, he had this trigger that everyone had forgotten about, the New South Wales Crime Commission. And when it reported in October last year, he'd already softened up he wasn't doing the mistake of a Mike Baird of what seemed overnight to be closing down greyhound racing. But they're the proportions of gambling. I'll only be able to take one more question. I have to, yeah.
One more, gents. Are we all done? Are we all done? Are we all done?
You can travel quietly, but Tim, that's been an outstanding address, really. It's one of those things that we don't think about it much because it never gets to the top of the news page for obvious reasons. It's diluted all the time. But the facts that you've presented with are really quite frightening. It's safe to say that most of us in this room are either full-on gamblers or not at all, and there won't be much change among this age group. but it's the youngies.
Have some hope.
Well, you can say put your hands up. But it's the impact on youth, and more importantly the impact on the underprivileged, etc.
Yep.
And you wonder what happens in the Northern Territory, where you've got, money going out in all directions to all sorts of people, completely unbridled. Tim, I don't want to go on. Thank you so much for your wonderful address. The website again is?
The Alliance for Gambling Reform. If you just type that in, up it'll come.
Okay, got that? The Alliance for Gambling Reform. We'll be on board.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Tim has to go now. That's been a pretty challenging set of figures, hasn't it? Let's do some action on that individually, eh?